but basically on April 27th, and I'm pulling from her intro, which I think is really concise. On April 27th, the House voted 100-1 to 231 against Congressman Matt Gaetz's resolution to remove all U.S. troops from Somalia. This is at a point when the signs are, when it looks like an escalation is coming in a fight with the Islamist group Al-Shabaab and the Somali government, which is backed up by AFRICOM, which is the U.S. imperial military cat's paw on the African continent, the U.S. Africa Command. And Somalia's president, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, is essentially on board for the U.S. to continue to have this presence of some 900 troops in fighting Al-Shabaab. Gaetz's resolution failed by almost the same number that his resolution to remove U.S. troops from Syria failed, and it was dedicated to challenging U.S. forever wars abroad. All the co-sponsors of the resolution were Republicans, although there was slightly more Republican than Democratic support. And so now let's listen to Matt Gaetz's rationale for introducing this resolution.
Great honor to participate in this debate with my esteemed colleague, Mr. Meeks of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and with a great patriot such as Mr. James of Michigan. I want to welcome the American people to the second part in a legislative series we are conducting about all of the places on the planet Earth where Congress still believes that 9/11 justifies current U.S. troop presence in 2023. And the first in that series was Syria. And I came to this floor, only got about 103 votes. But I made the argument that our troops were essentially sitting ducks, guarding oil extraction operations where their presence was known, where their location was easily identifiable. And I called for a withdrawal. That withdrawal was defeated. And then precisely what I predicted, more U.S. casualties from Iranian drones. That's what happened. Exactly what I said would occur. And it is with no joy I say that. And I know all of us would take any policy position we could to reduce U.S. casualties. And I think this debate will present an excellent opportunity to reflect on Somalia in that light. There are currently 900 U.S. troops in Somalia, give or take, and this resolution would bring them home. Somalia is a country of 17 million, tortured at times by Al-Shabaab, a group of roughly 7,000 hardened fighters and even more sympathizers. But to believe any of the arguments, just logically, that my colleagues are making, you have to believe that 900 U.S. troops is what is going to save a country of 17 million from a hardened group of 7,000. I think that strains not only logic, but our understanding of the history of Somalia, a country that has oscillated between failed state and just absolute coup revolution over and over again, civil war, sectarian violence. The future of Somalia must be determined by Somalia. And to the extent that foreign influences could be helpful, I would argue that the African Union is far better positioned to build a stronger sense of national identity and national unity among clans that have been warring in Somalia for generations than U.S. troops. I have yet to see the evidence that U.S. troops are the essential element to fusing relationships among warring African warlords, clans, and tribes.
Okay, I think we can stop there. I mean, this should have been the job of Ilhan Omar, who is of Somali. She's a Somali American who has family who are, her clan is actually in government now. Actually, her first, I think I covered it, her last husband is an advisor to the Somali president. And I think a little bit of history is in order before we present the opposition to Matt Gaetz's resolution, which is that the U.S. created this problem in Somalia, 100%. I mean, you can go back to U.S. military interventions in to supposedly oust al-Qaeda from Somalia, the fighting in Mogadishu, when Anthony Zinni said he didn't even care about the body count of Somali people, the constant intervention by the US there was essentially stopped by al-Shabaab because al-Shabaab cleaned up the chaos. Al-Shabaab was simply a coalition of moderate and maybe a little more extreme Islamist groups that called themselves the Islamic Courts when they came into government. They were extremely popular, or this was the post 9/11 era. And after stabilizing the country, the U.S. went to Ethiopia when it was under the control, I believe, of the TPLF, who are now out of government, and the U.S. is backed in this other proxy war, and essentially sent their military in to remove the Islamic courts, install a fake government backed by the African Military Command. They controlled a series of blocks in Mogadishu, basically a green zone. And al-Shabaab grew more extreme and more violent as they fought to return to power. And now the U.S. continues to fight al-Shabaab to maintain control over its government. There was a popular leader, and Ann Garrison has written about this for us, Mohamed Farmajo, who was elected president in Somalia. The U.S. started to put pressure on him to call elections, and Ilhan Omar was leading the charge in her role on the Africa Subcommittee in the House Foreign Relations Committee, while members of her family were waiting in the wings to serve for his successor. Farmajo wanted to create a Somali Coast Guard, which was independent of AFRICOM, because the West is dumping on Somalia's coast. There are also weapons flowing in, and he was advocating for more sovereignty. Many people in the Somali diaspora considered him a legitimate anti-imperialist leader. And so he was forced out. And now this government is completely on board with what the US is doing. And there's so much momentum in Washington and, at the Pentagon to ramp up US troop presence. So what Matt Gaetz is doing here, coming from a district which is heavily represented by veterans in the Florida Panhandle, is disrupting the U.S. plan to expand its presence in Africa. And let's play Ryan Zinke, who former Secretary of Interior, now he's in Congress, and his rationale for keeping troops in Somalia. Aaron, I don't know if you can tee that up because.
Yes, I can. And Ryan Zinke, he is the Congress member who, during the vote in over Syria. Okay, yeah. Well, he said that we have to fight ISIS over there in Syria, so we don't fight them over here.
Well, this is a similar argument.
3 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition, but I agree with my distinguished colleagues from Florida that Congress has an obligation to review it. Congress should not abrogate our responsibility. We should ask the tough questions. And ultimately, we should provide the funding necessary and the resources to win. That's our job. And I agree with you 100%. But as a commander, they are doing more than just guarding an embassy. A force structure of 900 may seem like a large footprint. But those of us who remember Black Hawk Down would suggest otherwise. A force requires medevac. Those medevac require people that service those aircraft. In case we get in trouble, we need a quick reaction force, a force large enough to defend our troops. Because I, and like my colleagues, know that if you were to put any American servicemen in harm's way, you want to ensure we have the adequate force to make sure they're recovered safely. They also have to be fed. Communications. In order to have an effective force, you need a footprint that can do its mission. What I also agree with is that we should have a plan. Before we unplug our obligations, we should know what unplugging it does and when, and also we should have a plan on what our obligations are. So much of this discussion is a discussion among similar views. We do have an obligation for freedom.
An obligation.
We have a commitment to democracy.
And what democracy are they really building there? I mean, this is a deeply undemocratic system. I don't want to get into the details, but the U.S. is not allowing a full country vote, and it's kept al-Shabaab out of power through force. But it's about freedom for Ryan Zinke, former Navy SEAL, energy industry guy from Montana, and he's on the military committee. I mean, it's just a bunch of nonsense. All he's saying is there's going to be an escalation, and Somalia obviously is strategically important for the U.S. because of its location along the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa. There was just a major proxy war that finally seemed to have reached its end in Ethiopia. So that's what this is about. Aaron, were you going to play something else?
Let me play for you guys what Zinke said about back when Gaetz had a measure to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria, what Zinke said.
The hard truth is this. Either we fight them in Syria or we'll fight them here.
Oh, man.
Either we fight and defeat them in Syria or we'll fight in the streets of our nation.
You have to admire his confidence in both cases. Like, he's so sure of himself in advocating for staying in Syria and Somalia and in invoking the memory of Black Hawk Down. What is he talking about? So you want to have another, like, you want to replicate that whole thing where we invade Somalia and fight people in Somalia? And his answer to that is to just basically send in more troops so that the U.S. has a better chance this time. But again, how many times do we hear about the U.S. occupation of Somalia and Syria? It only happens when U.S. forces get hurt, especially in Syria. And their policy is just to put young U.S. forces in harm's way. But my question is, so we know the hegemonic goal in Syria. It's obvious. It's to steal Syria's oil and wheat, as multiple officials have openly expressed from Trump to Dana Stroul, who's now a senior official under Biden. What is the hegemonic interest in staying in Somalia?
Well, it's geopolitics. And we actually published a great piece by Tim Coles, who wrote a really important book about British involvement, military involvement in Africa, contemporary British military involvement, drawing on the history of British colonialism. But I really would recommend, for a deeper background, this piece we published in August 2021 by TJ Coles or Tim Coles. In Somalia, the U.S. is bombing the very quote-unquote terrorists it created. It's a long piece, and I learned a lot from editing it. But it's about the Horn of Africa. I mean, the Horn of Africa is one of the most strategic places on the planet for trade, for waterways. It's like the South China Sea, or it's why the U.S. wants control of the Philippines. These are important trade routes where the U.S. needs complete control.
Right.
And Ethiopia, I mean, you have a major dam project there, the Renaissance Dam, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China's Belt and Road Initiative. And it's going to make Ethiopia a regional power, a mid-level power. I mean, Ethiopia has the capacity to be a kind of Turkey in the region. And the U.S. obviously isn't happy about that. Its old friends in the TPLF turned to them to try to destabilize this government and failed. But having a presence in Somalia, has a presence in Djibouti as well. These are drone bases. This is where drone activity is taking place. And unfortunately, Gaetz's resolution didn't say anything about U.S. drone activity in Somalia. Ilhan Omar did pipe up to criticize the failure to challenge the drone project, the constant drone operations in Somalia. However, she made the absurd implication that President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed will eliminate al-Shabaab within a year. And what Gaetz was saying was, they're both saying, let's let the native Somali forces fight this fight. but it's absurd that that's going to happen. It's not going to happen. There needs to be a negotiation. Ilhan Omar just really not taking the lead and not saying anything of real significance here and letting Gaetz take the lead is kind of telling when this is her country. Of course, and zero Democrats co-sponsoring is also telling. It's depressing. So, do you want to move on to Ukraine, or you want to add anything?